Hey, Benjamin.
Hello, Josh. How's your break going?
I'm sorry?
How's your vacation? Your forced obsolescence from the Twitter universe treating you?
Well, I'm just doing things aside from Twitter. It's probably not a bad thing. It's just so obnoxiously stupid. I mean, to get suspended for calling myself a fag is it's just the living end.
Hey guys,
Hey,
how's it going?
good. How are you?
I'm doing good. Good day.
Good to hear. Now, Limpida,
Mhm.
if you have a headphone, it might be optimal. It seems fine right now, but you never know what Zoom's going to do.
Okay, yeah, let me grab that right now.
What are your philosophical background, Joshua? Or
What do you mean?
Like thinker that you not style yourself from, but work off of. If you consciously work off of a political theorist or philosopher of some sort.
I don't think I do. I mean, obviously, like every human on Earth, my political philosophy is informed by things that people said before me. Um,
Yeah.
but I have a lot more time now today for libertarian and conservative thinkers politically than I had before. I didn't pay attention to any of them at all when I was a leftist.
Yeah. Well, you had, as a leftist, were you like a Chomskyite or
Oh,
a
very
Rousseauian?
Foucault.
Foucault.
Oh
Wow.
yeah. I was
Okay.
in the cult, baby.
Oh, wow. Okay. There we go.
Yeah, that was a lot of my undergrad was post-structuralism, postmodern anthropological critique, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
I don't have to give you any more detail. You know the entire story just from that.
Yeah. Yeah. And, Limpida, do you have a philosophical basis that you're going toward or working from?
Um, I so I started off Marxist, like a leftist communist type. Um, Part of that was informed by my family's experiences in the Eastern Bloc, and comparing it to how we were living in the United States. I was just sort of interested in it at first, and then it slowly turned into an appreciation of it. Then college hit, and it was like postmodern neo-Marxism or whatever. Like I was calling myself a communist and everything, even though postmodernism conflicts very heavily with like original Marxism. And not like Marxism Leninism, like original Marxism as Marx and Engels wrote it. Because Marxism Leninism iffy on how it actually like follows the heritage. Now I'm sort of well regarded among some of the anti-leftist Marxist types that are on Twitter right now, and I think that that's still how I perceive of the world.
So post-identitarian or pre-identitarian Marxism?
No, more well, sort of like pre-identitarian, I guess would be the way to describe it. But it's I guess the closest thing, like it has more in common with like the far right than it does the far left. But it's not like it's kind of hard to explain without sounding insane. But
No. Is it like a Bronze Age pervert kind of stuff, but with Marx, like communal bodybuilding instead of like individualist bodybuilding?
not really. The best way to explain it is the ruthless critique of anything and everything actually existing.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Yeah,
Are you sure
That
that's not
sounds-
feminism?
absolutely. Yeah, I'm sure it's not feminist. No, Marx, like Marx at the time was Engels too. They were in favor of the feminist movements that were going on, but only like privately they were against it. Publicly they had to be in favor of it. And now that it has become integrated into liberal democracy and bourgeois society, it is heavily criticized by the anti-leftist Marx types, and is different from like the post-leftist types that are saying, oh yeah, I was a Bernie guy now, but I'm just like beyond the woke stuff. This is a much deeper critique of everything else than just like I'm over talking about race or I'm over talking about gender. It's not class first. It's trying to explore what class is and a more grounded political analysis, which means that I constantly should talk my own profession and my own class, so to speak, petit bourgeois manager, because I'm a teacher. And it's made me very cynical, but I was already cynical, so it's fine. Yeah.
Ruthless critiques can be pretty exhausting.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
They can also tend to turn inward. I guess you're already expressing that because you're ruthlessly critiquing your own profession. So, how do you keep that in check?
I do the job as best as I can, as however I'm supposed to do it. But I'm very much aware that what my job is to indoctrinate young people. And no matter what form that's going to take, whether that's going to be with woke, which I avoid by all costs, or with more conservative, more libertarian expressions, I'm supposed to perpetuate the political superstructure of our time. And I will do my best within that to explain to students to like look out for their own self-interest and not cling to just vacuous ideals, and to really try to think about what their actual interests are. But there's a limit to how much I can do that because they're already thinking in terms of like freedom and equality and liberty and diversity and everything, which are too vague to really like hammer down as like specific policy or specific needs or political interests.
Well, aren't they also a little conflicting? Freedom and equality are not synonyms for each other.
Yeah.
And this is, you know, the people you're talking about, they don't understand this. They don't understand it at all. I didn't understand it for a long time.
Yeah. They're, they're 14, 15 years old. So.
Right.
But education is in a really bad state right now. I have one student, he handed in a project to me on Friday that, it was a group project. It was supposed to be sort of like just a PowerPoint on early America. And the only thing that he did was color in a drawing of Thomas Jefferson that someone else in his group had to trace for him.
What color did he make his skin?
Your standard peach color. He didn't even color in the tie though. Like he just did the skin. It was sad. I have to fail him. But
Are you even allowed to do that anymore? Are you allowed to fail a kid?
Yeah. I'm not even his real teacher. I'm a long-term sub for another teacher. But that teacher told me, listen, if you have to fail him, fail him. So.
Josh, are you on a laptop right now?
Yes, I am. Why?
Just ask to give yourself less headroom. Just angle it down a little bit. There we go. Excellent. Well, Helena's going to pop in as soon as we get going in earnest, so we might as well get going in earnest. But I have noticed, Limpida, that you've been, I don't know if this is the correct term, but you've been dropping some based critiques, specifically toward feminism, or maybe even certain behaviors within feminism, and its relationship to gender ideology, or its relationship specifically to young men's uptake of gender ideology. And Josh, you are not exactly not outspoken on this issue as well. So, and Helena's got some takes of her own too. So, I guess that's kind of like just the basis of where we're going to start. Like, one, I would like to hear the critiques, and two, I would like to put something out there specifically for young men of a variety of identities and proclivities with regards to ideology, but just, some good ideas and some warnings, for them to really kind of be more self-aware about how they conceptualize themselves as men in society. But before we get to the good part, we can go into the critique.
All right.
Can we get don't stick your dick in crazy in?
Does that apply to? Is there like a crazy hot access that for the gay?
Yes.
Gay bros? Yeah. Is it pretty much the same?
Yes. I think so. When gay men go wrong psychologically, they go wrong in ways that look very female. Not entirely, it's because we're not women. But if you're going to look at a group of men who you could honestly say, a group of gay men who you could say, looks like we got some personality disorder coming on here. We've got some borderline, we've got some histrionic, we've got some narcissism. It in gay men, it looks very similar to what you would find among women. Catty, competitive, passive aggressive, dishonest, triangulation, that sort of thing. And of course, those things are common to all people who use narcissistic abuse tactics, but they are a specialty of the female sex.
What was triangulation?
When people maneuver people into chess piece roles, so they will try to bring in another person and say, hey, Josh has been doing these terrible things to me, and do you know what he was saying about you? And I just wanted to make sure you knew. They've got to have somebody. It's the process of recruiting someone to help do their dirty work for them.
Mm-hmm. Mary Harrington, who's a brilliant author, she's targeting liberal feminism specifically, and I think her as some sort of techno-pastoralist. She thinks that there's some sort of like bridge backward with current technologies, but the whole liberal project she's pretty targeting pretty hardcore. And what she said on my channel a couple months ago was that everybody in the internet's reduced to female typical strategies for conflict resolution because it's all verbal and it's all reputational, and there's no possibility, or very rarely like a possibility, of actual male typical explosions of violence and then a reordering of hierarchies. So I wonder.
She's right.
That's just something to keep in mind, and how men adapt to that. I wonder to what degree we can adapt positively to that. And one supposes that there could be some sort of social code, like chivalry or gentlemanliness, or some sort of social ideal that we hold ourselves to. But we kind of do need to hold ourselves to that, to a form of conflict resolution that isn't just reputation, triangulation, self-promotion.
Can we? Is that possible? Is it possible right now, given the way things are right now, and we all know how they are on social media, you can't, of course, as you say, it's literally not physically possible to use Twitter to enact physical violence. And I mean directly. Yes, I understand that you can stalk somebody. I'm not talking about that. You can't reach through the screen and punch somebody. But since social media is structurally, it lends itself that the reputational kind of manipulation is native to social media. I don't know how we can combat that. I'm not sure that we can, actually. I'm not sure that there's a code of conduct that even if we could solve the tragedy of the commons problem, Even if we could get all men, for example, to hew to a certain code we might propose, I'm not sure I think it would do anything. Maybe it would.
Well, there's an app. There is an app called Clubhouse, and it was an audio-only app. It got really big a year ago, and I think it's really tanked. But it was basically a bunch of chat rooms, and what eventually happened was that people would start doing struggle sessions, and they just rebooted Evergreen, and reputational destruction and hyper-inflating violence going on. You know, like he was verbally accosting me, you know, and stuff like that, and it's a great social experiment, but at the same time, it was kind of corrupted by the fact that people are egotistical assholes that are kind of vying for attention. And that tends to corrupt a lot of different rooms and a lot of different relationships. But even though that's standard, you can still craft like good dialogue, and you can craft good work, and you can, you know, kind of spot that behavior and either avoid it or not allow it to take over. But something like Twitter, which is just an open free-for-all, where everybody can comment on everybody, and there's this weird kind of shifting, you know, banhammer that might change when Musk gets in charge of it. You know, like there's a content moderation of some sort that's kind of arbitrary, but still there's nothing to kind of hold us together. There's nothing like it's not like a church service or like a 12-step meeting. Like it's bedlam.
Yes.
Complete bedlam. So if we each voluntarily take on strategies to behave in a certain way, or at least to handle the app itself in a certain way by not believing in it with regards to how important it is in my own personal life to have a reputation there, or somebody's not actually hurting me when they're disagreeing with me or being rude to me, then that might take some of the pressure off, or might kind of change the landscape a bit. But here we can actually get to a real conversation. When it comes to male detransitioners specifically, like where you guys are sending your voices out there, and in order to do that, you have to tell your story, you have to be very vulnerable, and that it's really difficult to be vulnerable and also to be guarded at the same time. And especially if somebody's going through some pretty extreme trauma, because they are processing everything that you need to process for detransition, it's really difficult to draw that line in the sand and still do good work. And in order to kind of lay groundwork for other male detransitioners to find their way.
Yeah. So what I've sort of done, and I took a hard pivot, and I think it's a noticeable pivot, where I went from talking about my story and about specific stuff that happened to me personally, and just started deconstructing the radical feminism, talking about the political events that were involved, changes to legal code, whatnot. And the reason for that is I've pretty much processed it already, and anything I haven't processed, I'm dealing with privately. I don't care to bring all that stuff out. Everything that I have put out is staying up for other people to see. It's been very useful. I still get messages saying like, thank you for all your writing and everything. This explains how, you know, things that I went through, this explains things my kid went through, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't want to do that forever. And I think that a lot of detransitioners in general do that, where they think that they have to continuously relive the trauma online and open themselves up to all kinds of interrogation. And I'm not interested in doing that anymore, because this requires a political solution, but no one's talking about the political problems. And well, it's not that no one's talking about them, but they're talking about them through these frames that led us here in the first place, like radical feminism. And the thing that made me snap, that just made me make that switch altogether, is that no matter how I tried to placate these people, no matter how I tried to adopt their frame and explain my issues as a human being, as a young person, as an online addict, like, no matter how I tried to, I was still getting interrogated. Okay, what role did porn play? What was your vision of what a woman was? Like, was it, all of that. And I realized, like, if I said the wrong thing, they were going to trash my reputation anyway. And I stopped caring if I said the wrong thing. And I just started going after them and saying, like, this is why people retransition. This is why people stay hidden. This is why you don't see male detransitioners. This is why they're all coming out now. And it's not accidental that they all started coming out after I made that pivot. Because
it's crazy how they've all started coming out. Like literally within like a few weeks of you, there's just like fucking 20 people now.
Yeah. And you know, a couple of people have said, like, you know, I think you're going too harsh. I think you're making an ass of yourself. Correlation doesn't mean causation. Just because they're talking now doesn't mean it's because of you. But I mean, like, all that might be true. At the same time, now there is a space for men who have gone through this where they don't have to filter everything through the radical feminists, where they don't have to rely on them for their allyship or whatever. And one of the ways I did that, I mean, like, it's still very feminine the way that I do it, because it's still online. It's still all verbal. It's still just like shit talking and whatnot. And sometimes there's mobbing involved too. But like,
what, you and your bot army go after him?
Not my bot army, but a lot of the ROGD moms just like constantly backing me up, because they're like, my son's going through this. This is one of the only guys talking about it. I don't care what else you have to say. You know, like, he's telling the truth here. Like, even though it is still feminine because it's the internet, and the internet is a very feminine social space, the way that I talk is just blunt. It's just direct. It's just go fuck yourself. Like, I don't care about any of that anymore. So that, I don't know.
I'm here for it.
Like, I feel like it's I feel like that's like the closest you can get to a masculine way of interacting with people online, is just like to not give a shit about the reputation and just say what's on your mind.
You brought up a lot of really interesting things about the influence of radical feminism on here, and I think we can respectfully make a critique of radical feminism and how it's influenced the current cultural moment around a lot of the issues that we're seeing right now. We don't have to restrain it to transition and detransition, but I think people don't really understand that, and I'd like to hear all of your perspectives on its influence, and its positives and its negatives, so we can reform it if it needs to be reformed.
I want to say hi, Helena. It's nice to see you.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Hi, it's nice to see you. Sorry, I'm over here like twitching because as soon as I logged on, a gigantic eyelash lodged itself in my eyeball, and it hurts.
Oh, ouch!
So, yeah,
fucking misogynist eyelash.
Literally. Can't even have bodily autonomy against my own eyelashes, apparently.
Girl, fuck them lashes.
About to dump him.
I can't. Wait, it's 6:23 and we're already gendering eyelashes.
Yeah, I guess. Well, it is penetrating my eye right now. Yeah, it's so nice to meet you. I mean, I literally watch your show all the time, and I love your spicy takes. So it's great to meet you on this Mother's Day.
It is. It's Mother's Day.
Likewise, I'm glad both of you are two young people who are out there and actually telling the truth, and it's delightful.
I feel the same about all of you.
Yeah, well, I got to say kudos to Helena. Your Tucker interview's at 2.5 million views at this point.
Yeah, isn't that fucking crazy?
It's pretty cool.
That's why I'm taking a little bit of a step back from Twitter and just focusing on Kiwi Farms. A little bit less drama for me.
Oh, really?
Oh, but yeah, it's been pretty crazy. Like, my mom like follows all sorts of like conservative people on Facebook, and she's like, "Wow, look, your video has been shared by this person," and I'm like, "Great." So yeah, it's been pretty crazy. The Tucker thing has really opened me up to a lot of bullshit, but it's been good.
Yeah, so we can tie that into what Limpida was just saying about kind of crafting the message and filtering the noise. And I guess there's probably a lot of difference between what you're going through now, Helena, and what you're going through now, Limpida, because you're actually contending with feminists, oddly enough. And Helena, are you being targeted right now? I'm sure you are, but to what group is it coming from? Or
yeah, I feel like I no longer really contend very much with the feminists, but yeah, it's mostly the trans activists now, because they're kind of like, I had a recent, like this streamer who I guess made a video about me or whatever. And that's how I started reading Kiwi Farms again, because I found his thread, and it's like all this like total cow. But so that guy was attacking me, and then some like Harvard law professor, trans person, was coming after me and just like accusing me of lying, which doesn't make a lot of sense.
From Facebook 2017.
Yeah. Just, I don't know, just being really desperate. So it's not stressful in the sense that it's like, oh, they have something on me. It's just like, I'm the kind of person where it's like, despite what I do, I hate attention. And like, I'm pretty private, honestly. Like, I don't really share a lot about my life on Twitter. And then so when people are like going through my life, like that feels really weird. So it's stressful in that way.
Josh, what are you thinking?
Well, I'm actually wondering at what date, peg a year, when both of you, Limpida and Helena, decided to detransition. How long has it been for you?
For me, it's been almost 4 years. I decided to detransition in like February or March of 2018. I can never remember exactly when, but sometime around then.
What about you, Limpida?
I decided I was going to detransition sometime in the summer of 2021, and then I actually did it this January.
Why?
For me, like, because it wasn't working. I mean, because like the treatments, like I figured out, like, so May was when I had my big realization, like I've been lied to. This is all bullshit. I've been, brainwashed basically. And that it ties into like all these adverse like events in my life and everything. And, but I really needed to like take the time to let that sink in, and I did all the reading I possibly could on the phenomenon, on like the outcomes, on I was reading some of what Helena wrote. I read some of what Grace wrote. I was trying to find different like detrans men to talk to too, which kind of wasn't a thing. And then in the summer, I decided that I was going to detransition in large part because I was going to have to start teaching like that fall. And I didn't want to be trans in front of the kids, but I was not like mentally ready to do it yet. Because like the big thing was like the hormone switch. I wasn't sure how I was going to handle that, especially since like even considering that I was male just a few months prior would have like triggered like suicidal thoughts and whatever, because they tell you you're going to kill yourself if you're not on hormones and whatever. So I like wasn't ready for it. And then over the winter break for the high school I work at, I just decided to do it.
What about you, Helena? What made you decide to detransition?
Yeah, for me, it was also kind of a long process of like dealing with denial. So like before I transitioned, I identified as some version of trans for about 3 years. And during that time, I thought like when I transitioned, it would be like this amazing fantasy. Like I'm going to like become a cute boy and everything's going to be awesome. And that did not pan out. I like, my life just kind of went downhill. I just got even more lonely and dysfunctional than I had already been. And then after I had to be hospitalized twice because of the effects that testosterone was having on my brain, just basically making me have extreme like rage meltdowns where I hurt myself. And 2 of those times, like I had to go to the emergency room. And so after that, I just like the second hospitalization really made me think like, wow, this is not at all what I thought it was going to be. This really sucks. And that kind of triggered me thinking like, something is really wrong in my life. Like, what am I doing wrong? And as stupid as it sounds, at first, I didn't even really like associate it with the testosterone. I just thought like, oh, maybe I'm like smoking too much weed or something. Maybe I should try like quitting weed. But then after it took a couple of months, and then eventually it happened when I saw like a video of myself, and it was like pictures of me from like different eras, like since I started the testosterone. And I just like saw how I changed from like this young like girl with like the plump cheeks and like looking, all hopeful about life to this like sallow, like sickly looking masculinized version of me. And I was like, oh my God, like this is fucked. So that was kind of the final thing that like really just broke the dam. And then I was like, okay, I need to stop taking the testosterone.
I don't know how people can't see it. I think they do. I think they do see it. But what you just said about the sallow, unhappy looking, I mean, there is a quality to many of these young women who are on testosterone where they, and I'm not saying this to be flip or glib, but they really have a living dead aspect about them. Their skin color is unnatural. It looks unhealthy. They look unhealthy.
Even the ones who are like passing and they look more like men, like there's just something where it's like, I don't think that I've ever seen like a trans guy that has like the look of like a real man who's healthy with vitality. They at best look kind of like a sicklier kind of version of a man, but I've never really seen one that looks really healthy. And it's like, how could you? You have a female body, your organs are being fed the wrong hormones.
If Elliot Page can't pull it off, and she's got access to the best makeup artists in
it's the worst.
world.
It's the worst.
Best makeup artists, best estheticians, best nutritionists in the world.
Best ab implants.
Yeah, best ab implants. Yeah. Yikes.
You can do that?
But yeah, if Ellen Page can't even look.
You think she got that stomach from sit-ups, honey? No.
How do they implant muscle tissue? Is this like
they don't? It's like silicone, like fake little lumpies on the belly.
Are you kidding?
And you can tell because it's like the rest of her body is like completely not developed at all. But then she has like these like raging abs. So either she's been in the gym just like pounding away on the crunches all fucking day and just ignoring everything else, or she's had implants.
Wow. Okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Marvel.
It looks really weird because she's all like spindly, and then she has just like these big, voluptuous ab muscles.
Right. Benjamin, it's like Klingon brow ridges, but under the skin.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. See? Now you get it.
Yeah, I guess. I just don't know if they're comfortable.
No, they're not. There's no way they
Beauty
are.
hurts.
But there's a trans guy on Instagram that sometimes shows up in my feed who he passes pretty well. He has this dorky hat that he wears that's like fashionable or whatever. But he got like a beard implant, and
what?
It like yeah. It's head hair too. They just
for Christ's sake.
Yeah.
Wait, does he have like the male baldness and then a beard?
No, it wasn't the hair.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So it's head hair growing out of the cheeks, and this in men, natural men, it's a coarser, rougher thing. It's not supposed to be.
Can you just imagine? You're just like flipping your chin hair back and forth, like it's so sleek and smooth.
It honestly looks like if he grew it out, it would be more
like a bob.
Yeah, basically.
Is that the thing from the Munsters? Am I mixing that, or the Addams Family?
Yes, cousin it.
Cousin it.
But
So
like,
weird. Okay.
but like, it goes back into what Helena was saying. Like, there's this like literally perfect beard, like perfect lines, everything never needs shaping. It's like uncanny. And his face is like, okay, he has the developed jawline, he has the chin cleft and everything. And he looks pretty good considering everything. But when you look in his eyes, there's just nothing there. It's just sadness. It's just a complete, like, you can see that the person that you're looking at is not the person that's actually behind everything. It's very disconcerting.
That's a really good way to put it. There is that uncanniness with people, and maybe you don't notice it if you don't know that they're trans, but once you kind of like know that they're trans, and especially if you've seen pictures of them from before they transition, like you can see there's kind of like a mask, like a full body mask on people in a lot of cases.
Limpida, do you see that in photographs of you from that time? Or do you remember that feeling? Could you describe the feeling of like where you were at?
The best way to describe it is convincing myself that I was happy. Because I wasn't happy, and I thought that would make me happy. And it didn't. I mean, it stopped, like, when I stopped my testosterone, I stopped having like a lot of the like rage problems that I was having. I wasn't like ragey, but I like, anger builds up. And like, when I got relief from that, I was just really ecstatic because I was like, okay, it's gone. Like, it's off my mind. I'm like freer to do other things. I started crying a lot more, and that actually helped me work through some of what I had gone through, because the only other option was to get mad about stuff.
Wait, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'm confused about something. You said a moment ago, when I stopped my testosterone.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So for males, so testosterone is a much more powerful hormone than estrogen is. Mm-hmm. So for males, the standard treatment is to take a testosterone blocker and estrogen at the same time.
So
so when you say when I stopped my testosterone, what you mean is I stopped taking a drug that you mean when I blocked my testosterone.
Yeah, when I blocked.
Okay, all right, thank you. I'm sorry. It was just.
Yeah. So when I blocked my testosterone, when I functionally chemically castrated myself, I like that rage basically stopped immediately, and I was able to like get more in touch with deeper feelings that I had been suppressing. And that did make me happier because I was having less of the like traumatic arousal all the time. But like, I wasn't actually happy. It was just me saying like, okay, this is what has solved all my problems. I have to keep going with this. And if I look at the photos from the time, like, I was not happy before I was trans. I was not happy when I started socially transitioning. There was a smile on my face, but there was nothing there. Then once I start passing as a woman, or close to it, there was like a cheerierness there, but it's because I had been in like serious trauma therapy, and that was actually working. And I still was like ascribing it to, oh, I'm trans, I'm on treatment, everything. As it went on, like, the pain was growing because I could tell something was wrong, but I was trying to ignore it. And then I finally, detransition, and all the life is back in my face, and gestures, and how I relate to people and everything. Like, I'm happy to actually be alive again, because I feel alive again.
And the traumatic arousals, do you manage those better?
When I say traumatic arousal, I mean like flashbacks. Like I was having, I was having pretty bad flashbacks.
From a traumatic event or a traumatic time kind of thing?
Not like one specific one. From several, from living with the cult, from things that went on when I was younger too.
Yeah.
And some of it was also because I was going, like, I had psychosis and OCD. So I was seeing, I had very violent, intrusive thoughts too. I was like, I would imagine, like, if I were walking down a road and I'd see a store, I would imagine the store getting robbed in that moment, or like a SWAT team blowing it up or something. And I would just stand there with that like vision in my head and wonder what I'm supposed to do now. And that was happening all the time. So,
Wow.
and
Now we know
estrogen
what-
made it worse.
So we know what life is like in Michael Bay's head, I guess.
You're not the only one. I don't know. I don't describe myself any longer as having obsessive compulsive disorder, but I did indeed have it and was diagnosed and treated for it. It's almost completely remitted at this point. But it's like, Benjamin. It's everybody knows they know the stories about ritual behaviors like washing your hands repeatedly or checking the door, checking the stove. And I had some of those, but what people don't talk about as much are the really grisly, frightening and disturbing, intrusive, violent thoughts. And they're not necessarily an indicator that you have some desire to actually enact violence. They are intrusive. You don't want those thoughts, yet they come anyway.
And
Weirdly enough, I used to also really struggle with that, more so when I was younger. I wouldn't say that I experience it at all anymore, but especially like it started when I was in middle school. I would just develop like a fear that I was going to like become something really bad. So I remember one example was in middle school. The first experience I had of this was I was watching like an episode of Law and Order SVU. And in the episode, there was someone who was like a necrophiliac. And I just got it into my head that like I was going to grow up and one day like realize that I was a necrophiliac. And I literally lost sleep over this. Like I would be lying in bed, like heart pounding, visions of like this realization. Oh my God, what am I going to tell my family? They're all going to disown me. They're going to think I'm disgusting. On like this fantasy of I realized I'm like a necrophiliac when I'm an adult or something. I'm not. But yeah, like I had this, I was a really anxious kid. But yeah, so just kind of ironic that.
Well, I mean, the cure for that, darling, is you just have to go work at a funeral home. That's your Tinder.
Oh.
No, it's so gross. I'm normal now, I promise.
Well, I wonder what is the intersection, if there's a commonality with this intrusive thought or this obsessive thought, because it sounds like it's a powerful imagination that's exerting itself on a person who's not able to work through another issue or something. There's something kind of rising up that's not being able to be processed, and then the imagination is kind of like just like a dream state, just riffing on it and then externalizing, in the case of violence, onto a store, where you're like, okay, if it's like a release of pressure that's completely processed through the imagination.
It's not a release, though. If that's the function that's underneath that, it doesn't complete its job, because there's nothing about that feels like a release. It's torment.
And how did you work through that, Josh?
Well, a couple of things, and like I would say I don't know. Obviously, I don't know the biographical histories of Limpida or Helena aside from what they have shared publicly. So I'm not making any statements about either of you two individually, but I will say that these kinds of psychiatric problems, obsessive compulsive disorder, which is, in my view, an extraordinarily exaggerated anxiety. I don't mean exaggerated like it isn't real. I mean, it's an anxiety disorder squared. That's what it is underneath. It's anxiety. These kinds of things, depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, panic disorder, these are results of trauma. These are results of trauma, whatever your trauma may be. Maybe it's childhood abuse, maybe it's sexual abuse from someone outside the family, maybe it's some other combination of circumstances. But most of the people who present this way psychiatrically have a severe trauma background. So it is not weird or unexpected for these things to happen. They do tend to cluster together. For me, And I don't know if this is the answer. I don't know if it's the answer for everybody. Maybe it is not the answer. But for me, SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors like Prozac and Zoloft, were very, very helpful in pushing, getting rid of the intrusive thoughts and the panic. Panic disorder and obsessive compulsive, in my view, obsessive compulsive disorder are shades of the same thing. Maybe everybody doesn't experience them that way, but I did experience them that way. And time does help too. The older you get into adulthood, merely aging does blunt some of this for many people, I have found.
And the SSRIs are, they give you a break from that in order to do kind of more psychological work, you think, in your case?
I don't, all I can, they significantly decreased the symptoms.
Okay.
Now I spent a long time during my adulthood, my young adulthood, not actually doing the work when I would skip in and out of therapy. This therapy that I've been in now for almost 5 years is the first time I've ever actually been really completely honest and have not seen it as a temporary balm to make me feel better during an emergency. So I should have been doing that all along, but I wasn't capable of doing that.
I just want to put that on, highlight that you have to be ready for therapy. And you might even need pre-therapy before therapy can start to work for you.
Sometimes you need to get bashed around more. Sometimes you need to hit your head against the wall more and have more horrible events in your life. And, if you're like,
or you need to get out of your shitty, toxic situations that you get yourself into that just completely have your thinking disorganized and your emotions all over the place and dysregulated. At least that's what I needed. Because I think, like Benjamin, what you were saying something about how it's like something's being repressed, and then like you get this horrible anxiety. And I think that rings pretty true for me. I think it has a lot to do with this feeling that sometimes you grow up with when you grow up in like a dysfunctional family or a relationally dysfunctional family, where it's like you can sense that something is very wrong, like something is really off. And like it's not like how other kids, like you watch other kids talk to their parents and stuff, and you just feel that something is really wrong. But since you're so young, you don't have the context or even like really the cognitive ability, I think, to like make sense of what's wrong. So then I think your brain just like latches on to different things, trying to like find out what's wrong, because like your body's kind of like screaming at you all the time, like this is wrong, like I need help. But your brain is just like latching on to other random things. And I think that's definitely what trans was for me. I think that's what it is for a lot of people, because like their brains are so desperately clamoring for something that makes sense. And then like the trans thing comes in and it's like, oh, this makes sense, just do this. But obviously it's not true.
That's excellent that you just said that. Because it in a way, maybe even at bottom, these kinds of mental illnesses that we all have experienced in our different ways, and the symptomatology you can think of as mental illness is often a way of rationalizing the irrational. It's trying to find a logical explanation for something that you wish to avoid. The truth, the real toxic thing in your life, right? Mm-hmm. That you think, oh, well, the toxic thing in my life is that I was born in the wrong body. Or the toxic thing in my life is that I have a chemical imbalance that's genetic and it just makes me crazy. Or it's this, or it's that, or it's this, or it's that. For me, all of that was to avoid the reality that my mother was actually monstrous, right?
Yeah.
Abusive and monstrous. For other people, it's going to be, whatever their trauma is. But I think our mental illnesses try to make sense of a nonsensical situation that our emotions are not allowing our intellect to recognize.
Josh, did you end up latching onto an ideology of some sort to expend your to exercise this demon out of you? Something analogous to the trans ideology?
Oh yeah, just hardcore leftism, social justice, radical feminism.
Okay. What is it about those? Yeah, well, what is it about those ways of looking at the world and interacting with the world that are an exercise for what we're talking about. Because I see, and I don't mean to lump all GCs or gender critical feminists in that at all, but there's a small vocal contingent that is using feminism to exercise trauma, specifically male origin.
I don't think it's a small contingent, but we can differ on that. I think it's a very big one.
Okay. So what is
yes.
it about it that's particularly adept at allowing people to externalize their trauma?
That's it. It externalizes blame and it externalizes responsibility. It allows you to find somebody who did a thing, who did a bad thing that made all of the things bad. And if you could merely corral those bad people, then everything would be just fine. You don't have to change anything about yourself. You don't have to be more discerning about who your friends are. You don't have to think about things differently. You've identified the bad thing. And in much of modern feminism, men are the bad thing. Maleness is the bad thing. Why was I vulnerable to this? My mother. I was raised in a single parent household after about the age of 8 or 9 when my mother kicked my violent stepfather out of the house. But my mother, who I describe as having both borderline and narcissistic personality disorders, is in many ways a very typical screeching, angry, bitter feminist. And not all feminism must be screechy, angry, and bitter. I am not saying that. A lot more of it is screechy, angry, and bitter than lots of feminists want to admit. But when you are raised that way, and when you combine that with the fact that, for me, I had to blame everything that was wrong in our family, and a lot was wrong in our family because of my violent stepfather, right? That is true. But I decided that was the only thing that was wrong with my family, that my mother was the savior, and that anything my mother had ever done wrong was because a man had made her do it, or a man had damaged her and she couldn't do anything but what she had done. And I internalized that, and I didn't realize until much later that I had internalized it. Not only did it form my views about other men and their motivations in a way that really dehumanized men, but I was doing the same thing to myself. It was self-hatred.
I think the way that one of the main thing that they always say that they're against is the patriarchy, right? it's the patriarchy that is making me do this. It's the patriarchy it's making me do that. The patriarchy decides everything. The reason women are so into hookup culture, patriarchy. The reason that some women want to stay home and be moms, patriarchy. There's no agency for women in it at all. And really the stand-in for patriarchy isn't, they always say, no, this is because of millennia of social development and all of this conditioning and blah, blah, blah. But really what they're saying is it's men. It is the men in my life. It is the men around me. It is every man I have ever come across. It's men overall. And whenever they use patriarchy as their that's the cover for it. That's the theory they get to spit out to sound intellectual, to sound like they know what they're talking about, but they're really talking about an abusive ex or an abusive father or just guys they don't like.
Limpida, you internalized this to a certain extent, and how did that change your relationship to men and to yourself as a man?
I internalized it to a large extent. When I was a kid, I was a little bitch. I was a little bitch. I was at the bottom of the male hierarchy. I was bad at sports. I was chubby. I had moobs. And I also had, for a lot of reasons, really bad hypochondria. So I thought I was sick all the time. And I was having I started having panic attacks when I was 8 years old.
Oh, wow.
So it was I wasn't I wasn't an ideal boy, basically. I was at the bottom of everything. And because I was younger and autistic, I wasn't emotionally as mature as everyone else. I didn't do male bonding that well. I didn't do female bonding that well either. But so I just thought that boys were bad from that early age. and my mom was also like was like a feminist type. She thought that like women needed to like, you know, gain more rights, and they're always under attack. And she would always tell me about how Romania had like zero abortion whatsoever, and how it's so great that America does, and whatever. Not that she, I don't know whether she got an abortion or not, but she has 2 kids, so like I don't know. But at any rate, like she was also like a feminist type, more of a liberal feminist type. But then puberty hit. I started getting that, like, you know, the T rage and the libido and everything like that. And I was exposed to porn at like 9 years old, which was, and some of it was really violent. And in my teen years, I had like male friends show me 4chan too. And some of the stuff that you saw on 4chan was just really, really nasty. And I really didn't want to associate with these guys at all. And it really, like, and whenever I saw the girls, it was just like, oh, they're chatting and they're just like, you know, they're not doing any, like, they're not hitting each other. They're not, you know, they're not talking about sex in like these really like gross ways. So I thought, like, I just thought that women were better. I just straight up thought women were better. And then once the pop feminism started to like snowball around 2011, 2012, like, I really started to like think, okay, gender nonconformity is the moral decision here. Like, I have to be less like a man. I have to do my best to like suppress these impulses, and try not to be like that. And it got worse when I met my girlfriend too. Because like for a lot of reasons, because she was already into like the like, you know, they always say like, oh, well, the trans side of things that's liberal feminism. No, my ex was a radical feminist. She believed in the whole male female oppression dynamic, and it's not about biological sex necessarily, but it's about, you know, gender in general. Like, masculine traits are oppressive, feminine traits are liberatory, or whatever. And for a lot of reasons, like, I just took her lead on everything because I was so scared. And this also ties into the OCD. I had for literal years, the entire length of my relationship, I had intrusive thoughts that I was raping my girlfriend, even though it was consensual, even though it was, and sometimes I got like roped into doing stuff in bed that I really didn't want to do, that would involve some sort of like really domineering role for me. That made it worse, especially because we were always talking about how bad men are, and men are this and men are that.
And then she would turn around and fetishize that and have you act that out?
Sometimes, yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Super typical.
Extremely typical. Extremely typical. Once I started thinking about it more, like, I saw it everywhere, and I saw it on Tumblr a lot. The same women that were like writing like rape fics, like fanfics about rape, for their own pornographic reasons, we're also talking about how all men are eventually rapists, how heterosexual sex is in itself rape.
What's going on with that mechanic? I mean, I understand human beings fetishize whatever we call a taboo, right? But there just seems like it's something really interesting to be fixated on rape. Of
trauma.
Trauma. Because Helena, you talk about the predilections of young female pornography ingestion, about the idealizing of the homosexual male relationship as a expression of a kind of some sort of acceptable expression of the female desire, because they're told that they hate men, or they're told, or they have internalized this perception of men as consumers and dominators. And so there's a power imbalance no matter what. So they're attracted to that. And,
yeah, it's so complicated. The reason why like straight girls go for gay fanfic is like, man, we need like a whole like field of study devoted to that, because there's just like layers to it. But I think, I think it is about trauma, like the kind of like focus on men being oppressive, men being rapists, men always violating All male behavior must be interpreted in the least generous lens possible. But then, you know, on the flip side, a lot of, and I can corroborate what Limpida said with, like, you know, all the rape fan fiction. Like, that's huge. There's a lot of that out there. And obviously, you know, not everyone is into it, but there are a lot of people are. But I also think that it's about control. It's about, especially when there's like an actual male involved with women in a circle of a social circle with women who are like this. I really think it's kind of about like setting up a situation where it's like, you as the male, you can't win. You're always kind of on the defensive. You're always on the losing field. If you are too domineering, then you're being like a rapist or whatever. And if you're not domineering enough, then you're not being you're not doing what the women say, I guess. And so I feel like there's this kind of dynamic, and it really is, I think, a lot of young women who, and I'm sure older ones too, who they have been traumatized, or they have experienced, you know, some kind of adversity in their life, and they're locating that in men, and then trying to get back some control by either forming this kind of like weird contradictory caricature of men, or actually, you know, putting that onto a man in their life. And usually it's like one of these young boys who usually, you know, a straight boy who doesn't really fit in with other boys, therefore has low self-confidence. And like, I've seen it so many times, like these friend groups where it's like girls and then this like one boy, and like he's totally just like
a soy boy that's like the whipping boy of some sort, or
yeah, like the whipping boy. I wouldn't
be me.
I wouldn't say soy boy, but yeah, like the whipping boy. And sometimes you have friend groups where it's like the gay best friend, and maybe that guy could fill that role too. But I think for some reason the like gay best friends tend to hold their own a little bit better. But yeah, when it's like a mostly female friend group and there's like one guy and he's like not the most masculine guy and he has low self-confidence, like, man, there's just something about like that type of guy that really gravitates towards like this type of woman that we're talking about, or young woman that we're talking about. And I've seen it. And a lot of the times that boy ends up identifying as trans, at least in what I've seen, both online and in real life.
That describes my experience in high school perfectly. Actually, and it transferred over to college too, where, because the cult I was in was also mostly women, and like what they would do with me is like, if I showed any dissatisfaction with how I was being treated, or if I like, you know, acted like a man trying to like set my own boundaries or anything, like that was seen as a red flag. That was seen as like, oh, this is a potentially violent person.
Yeah, everything's a red flag.
Yeah. But
dog whistles.
But the second that I remember there was this one time where I was asked by a black female member of my cult to tell white people in the audience to move to the back row. And they needed me to be standoffish about it. That they would use though, like the assertiveness and like the masculine traits I had to use it in their service. I wasn't allowed to use it for myself. I wasn't allowed to be my own person with it. I had to be super feminine within the group, or else it was a problem. But when push came to shove, they knew I was a man, and they used me for that purpose. And it was like that with my friend group. It was like that with my girlfriend. It was, you know.
So you're a bitch in the club and a bouncer at the door.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And sorry, Helena. There's one other aspect of it too, is that like, and no one talks about this, when you're that straight guy. There's two more things. The reason the gay guys tend to hold their own a little bit better is because they actually understand female social dynamics. Straight guys don't. But the other problem is like, there's a lot of sexual harassment that happens within that that circle, that circle. Like when you're the only straight guy in a group of girls, like you are the guy the easy access guy that people flock to, because you are non-threatening. You're totally disarmed. You'll do anything for anybody because you don't have any other friends. So they can touch you, they can tease you, they can make passes at you. They can make suggested things at you. And if you refuse them, suddenly there's a problem in the group.
Oh man.
This is fascinating, and there needs to be more talk about this, obviously, because until we've had this conversation today, I don't think I really realized that there is this dynamic going on, the unconfident young straight man in the female group. I always think of it in terms of, I was always the gay guy in the female group, and I thought that was how that dynamic came out. But there is apparently a whole other thing out there. You're not the only one, Limpida, but this is fascinating.
Pardon me. There was this kind of this cheesy, I'm going to put it on the screen, but it's just, you can't see it. There's this cheesy infographic that came up in my timeline, and I kind of mocked it on Twitter, and it kind of got some traction. But it's this picture of this guy with kind of a belly. It's not that ripped or anything. Very passive looking guy, no eyes, no face, but just kind of a picture of him. And then the text reads, "How to recognize an actual gender non-conforming man."
Oh, this one.
1, doesn't use violence, threats, or intimidation against women. So there's clearly, but you can use it against men. Yeah. 2, doesn't use porn, stripping, or prostitution. So basically has I would think, a respectful relationship to sexuality, but there's something going on there where they want him to not really have a sexuality. I kind of sense that. 3, doesn't support, practice BDSM or any kind of domineering sex. I think that it might
any kind of domineering sex,
except for the one that they demand and ask for.
Yeah.
4, doesn't use slurs like the B word, the C word, the SL, bitch, C word, YouTube will censor that, slut, or other misogynistic language. And 5, treats women and girls like human beings, equal in value to himself. And it just ticked me off, because that's not it. That's just somebody who lacks self-control, or is, that you can control. That has nothing to do with being a gender non-conforming man. That's just a poor idea of what it is to be a man.
That's just a eunuch. That is literally a eunuch.
This can be summed up very, very simply. This kind of feminist imagination of what male characteristics are, here's the mistake they're making. These are not male typical characteristics, the negative ones that they list. Those are narcissistic and personality disordered typical characteristics. They are abuser typical characteristics, not male, not just how men are, how abusive men are. I didn't realize that until recently, but to me, that's the entire thing. It turns all on that.
Yeah, and then the framing of that as like that's gender conformity is to be an abuser. Like that's the insinuation. I joked about it so people didn't get what I was talking about. But still. So I can see that attitude is supported in kind of pop feminism. So I can see how young men that are in the position that we're saying, whether they're gay or straight, and end up in that kind of controlled environment with the females, are having to live out this kind of double life, or not being able to develop masculine characteristics, or to really own their own power, their own agency, and then learn how to manage that kind of force, that kind of, libido and and your anger and all that stuff. You can't really develop it because it's completely subverted to the control of the group.
One thing that happened to me before I was on hormones, and that kind of killed my testosterone and changed the way that I thought for a while. Like when I was still identifying as trans before hormones, I was very outwardly passive and trying to be non-threatening and trying to really keep from doing anything masculine, really trying to kill those behaviors in front of other people. And all that pent up anger I had, and all that sadness at how I was being treated, especially the mob tactics, like the triangulation that Josh mentioned, that was constant. I just directed all of it at myself, because I thought that to be mad at a woman for saying something fucked up meant that I was bound to be an abuser somehow. So it just all went inward. And I did a lot of things to like hurt myself or try to put myself in danger because I thought it meant that I wasn't worth being alive. Bummer, huh? Oh wow,
Yeah.
I shut everybody up with that.
It's familiar.
I was thinking. I was thinking like I'm obviously the only woman here, but I can completely relate to this in terms of other, axes of oppression or whatever. Probably the biggest one in my life has been race. Like I just remember, especially online. And I think, that's one thing where it's like some of these like Gen X or like boomer feminists who like they're unwilling to hear what someone like Limpida has to say, even if they don't like the way that he says it. They're just completely unwilling to entertain the idea that feminism plays any role whatsoever in young men, trying to not be men. I think what they don't understand is that like this is more of a phenomenon that has to do with like the political ideologies that have been popularized online and in the universities, and that despite the fact that it's not maybe how the entire culture thinks, even though like it's progressively becoming more and more like the entire culture, that it is something that's still, extremely pervasive in a lot of young people's lives, and it will completely control the social dynamics in your life if you're under the age of maybe 30, but even more like 25, or increasingly now it's more and more younger. But yeah, it's like it might sound kind of crazy to a feminist being like, oh, like, why can't you just use your male privilege to get out of that situation or whatever? Like, I don't know what they think, but I don't think they understand like how insanely pervasive these ideas about privilege and oppression are, and how they're being used by extremely abusive and manipulative people to just like completely control the subject that they're trying to control.
Well, you can see that in the intersectional cascade when the women get together. Like, I'm not to pick on feminism, but if, let's say, there's a feminist group that gets together, and they're doing their thing. This happened actually when Megan Murphy came to Seattle, and they had their event, and the trans rights activists like went after the women, the feminists, so they got to explain how they're under assault. The trans rights activists were accusing the feminists of trying to erase their existence, and then being terrible to the women. So the women are like, see, this is the patriarchy. And then the trans rights activists are like, see, this is the patriarchy. So everybody's yelling about the patriarchy. And then when they had the event and there was a bunch of speakers and they were trying to lay down their case about gender critical radical feminism and things of that sort, they had a Q&A, and then somebody comes up and starts complaining that there's no black women on the panel. It's like, well, okay, now we're just listening to a bunch of white women, and like you guys aren't representing. It just the entire structure you can see is constantly destabilized. So it's just a lazy Susan of who gets to have to go through a signal of giving up your power. And it's no longer about exercising power wisely. It's about constantly relinquishing or taking back power, right? It's this kind of this ceding of power or exerting of power and not really doing anything productive. It doesn't seem like, or it can, unless there is a threat, a lot of political activity doesn't really actually work. Like you need to kind of have a threat in order for certain forms of feminism to really work. And you see kind of like a rebirth of feminism because they have this transgender ideology that they're now fighting. So a lot of those tactics come back up, but they need that constant. And I'm not just talking about feminism. I'm talking about any sort of activism at all, any sort of anti-oppression maneuver. It needs to manufacture the oppression or find the oppression or have the oppression in order for it to function
and
as
keep
a
it going and make
phenomenon.
sure that the embers don't burn out ever, 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 ever.
Yeah, but people such as Limpida and other people who are kind of get caught up in this for one reason or another, I see that they are not being able to develop as full human beings. They're actually being kind of gelded, literally in some cases, but figuratively in others, and not really being able to process all your trauma correctly, and then actually start making your way towards being a good human being, a good adult. And I think becoming a man, I think that I'm a gender positivist. I'm not a gender critical. I think that there should be some sort of ideal masculinity that we all don't have to manifest. It's not compulsory, but there should be the idea on offer for young men of this is what a good man is. And it's not some man who doesn't beat up a woman. That's not a good man. Like that's describing not a bad man. Like that's just not a bad man. So I'm wondering, Limpida, if that even sounds like something that is positive to you, if you've going through and shedding all of the negative experiences with feminism, if you kind of have an idea of the man or the masculine that you can, use in order to develop yourself and that part of yourself more, or if gender is completely a fiction for you.
Well, I've stopped believing in, so I'm not like, the way I'll put it is I only think sex is real. I only think sex is real. I think talking about gender as a social construct, I don't believe in that frame. I think all the differences that we see socially between the sexes are because of how the sexes work. I don't it's not that I'm gender critical in the way that the feminists are, where they say gender is some sort of patriarchal construct that's just, made up or whatever, and, blah, blah, blah. And I'm not like a gender positivist in the same way you are, where it's like, well, there are positive aspects to both sexes and stereotypes about them. Like, the stereotypes exist because the differences exist. And I don't like the stereotypes that we're told now are men and women, or that what a trans person is and whatever, like I think of that as like deliberate social engineering. And I think the stereotypes, the differences that we notice ourselves speak for themselves. I don't think that there needs to be any sort of like middle layer between what our sex actually is and how we perceive it. I think it's just real.
But in sloughing off or shedding the feminist ideology and the transgender ideology, is there any sort of mental conceptual framework that you have to allow yourself to grow and to deal with these sex-based characteristics that manifest socially?
I have just that's how I've dealt with it, is just telling myself it's real. And there sometimes like detransitioners talk about like how they got over here's the thing, like when it came to getting over OCD, when it came to getting over PTSD I actually did some like intensive therapy for, so that's maybe a little different, but like OCD, body dysmorphia, eating problems, all of this, all I did really was just accept that this is how I am. Like, that's all I really did. And it was just a decision. Like, okay, I don't need to change anything else. I need to change my lifestyle because it's unhealthy, but I don't need to change the things about myself that are already there. I can change the way that I talk to other people. I can change like how I maneuver around, but I can listen to my own body. I can listen to my own instincts and just trust them, because I've been right before. And everything that has led me off the right path has been me trying to dull those things. And that's how I managed to accept masculinity and embrace being a man and everything like that. And I don't think that you need I don't believe in the whole representation thing either. I think the only reason that I think men need role models, but they need to be role models that are actually important in their lives in some way. Having a truly masculine superhero character or something is not going to help. It's not it doesn't help to talk about that stuff in history classes. It doesn't help to talk about that stuff in anything. You need people that actually matter to you in your own life, that are there for you, that will support you, that you can learn from. That's really how you learn how to be a man or a woman, is through the people that you're actually that actually love you and that you love as well. It's not through these images that are just being pumped at you.
That's a really good point, and that makes me think about how the way that, you know, family size has really decreased to the point where a lot of people are living with themselves, their two parents, and maybe a sibling or two. But they don't have, you know, a ton of aunts and uncles and grandparents to be all sorts of different kinds of role models and also be all sorts of different kinds of relationships. So it's like, if you don't have a good relationship with your parents, you're kind of screwed. Like, you don't have that aunt. A lot of people don't have like that aunt who either lives with you or lives really close by or whatever. Like, growing up, my family lived hours and hours and hours and hours away from anybody who was related to us. So I think that when you don't have like that kind of like, you know, large kind of variety of people who are close to you and related to you that you can look up to and either emulate or see how they're causing problems in their life, then I think you run into a lot of these issues where people grow up like not really knowing how to grow up really. If they don't have a stellar example in their parents.
I wonder if the social justice ideology broadly construed that is manifested in certain forms of feminism and transgender ideology, if there's something about that gives you a pickup family, if there's something adaptive about that kind of activism or changing of the world or the framework of fighting oppression on one level or another, kind of takes the role of not having a family by making you feel or simulating a closeness, solidarity they call it, which I guess is the form of intimacy, but it's kind of a group intimacy. I've never really liked that solidarity thing. That's always kind of felt culty to me or creepy to me. But we could go along the route of, you know, there's Tumblr, Aunt Tumblr. You don't have any extended family, but you do have Aunt Tumblr and Uncle Reddit, you know, to like teach you how to be a good person, right? Or there's a social justice ideology where you can just really immediately have meaningful, impactful relationships, or at least the, you know, simulation of meaningful, impactful relationships. And then those two things just dovetail really intensely.
Social justice ideology is on Tumblr and Uncle Reddit.
Well, they took over. Reddit used to be kind of cool, but then something happened post-burn.
I remember during our first like interview, I mentioned that when I was like in 5th grade, I thought I was edgy for using Reddit, and everybody was roasting me in the comments, being like, "Oh, Reddit's edgy." It was in 2007. It was.
Yeah.
You can watch people die on there in 2007.
I'm sorry, God. I'm sorry that I have to do this, but I do have a heart out. I got to leave the conversation and go pick somebody up. So,
okay. Well,
I'm sorry.
Do you have 10 minutes, or do you need to go right now?
I do need to go. Yeah.
Okay. Closing remarks, then, Josh.
Closing remarks is that we need to do this again because I'm sorry that I'm not going to be able to hear the rest of what you say. Well, I will hear it in the recording, but this is great conversation. I hope we actually can do it again because I think there's a million different things we could go into. So,
yeah,
thanks,
let's
guys.
do it.
Yeah,
okay. Yeah, bye. Have a good night.
Safe drive.
Good to meet you.
Okay, you two hash it out now.
Okay.
Time to confront him about his misogyny.
Oh,
well, that happened last night. That happened.
You guys confronted him? What happened?
Yeah, explain that.
So I
love when people try to hold you accountable on freaking Twitter. Maybe they happen in real life. It's like, you can't hold me accountable. Like, oh, we're going to hold Benjamin Boyce accountable. Like, fuck you. What are you talking about? So let's hear your accountability story.
So, like, I don't know. It's like 10 o'clock. I'm in bed. I'm bored. I can't sleep because I had like 4 cups of coffee. I just see this space pop up in the app that's like post space debrief or whatever, and some of the icons are from Upper Hand Mars's space that we had like literally the day before. So I click it, I join. I'm curious what's there, and then immediately the host is like, "Oh, Limpida's here. We have questions to like ask you because we're just like so confused about like some of the stuff you said."
You got suckered into a struggle session.
I did. It was literally a struggle session. The first question that was asked of me was, so what role did porn play in your transition? And I answered honestly. I was like, well, I was exposed to porn at 9 and it scared the fuck out of me and scarred me. And I, I was never into any of the like AGP porn and none of the sissy fetish stuff that like some people talk about. It was like pretty standard fare, I guess, but like, and I don't think it had much to do with the transition at all, if I'm being real. And they were sort of taken aback by that, and they asked another question that was like, what, how did porn affect your view of what women were? And I was like, I think the women in my life affected my vision of what a woman was more than porn did. And they just like, they didn't like any of my answers, especially once they started talking about like feminism, like asking me questions like, why do you think radical feminism like started trans? And I start trying to answer, and then immediately someone tries to cut me off, and I just shout over them like, no, shut up. The guy hosting it couldn't host the space at all. He would ask a question and then ramble on about why he was asking it, until at one point I was just like, just ask the question, ask the fucking question. I'm right here. Like, a bunch of people had their hands up. One of them was literally like a uterus icon, which, like, I mean, good for you, girl, but I can tell that you're not jazzed that I'm here. One woman like cut me off in the middle of something I was saying to say like, I am so furious at this person right now. I can't believe he can't even define what a woman is. I'm like, what? No one asked me that, first of all. Second of all, like, do you even know who I am? Like, not to be like that, but like really?
Moderation needs to be key. There was some tools being developed on Clubhouse before Twitter started the spaces, but I just see that without moderation, this is just a bunch of midwits just repeating the lines. It's just you have your script, you repeat the lines, and if anything doesn't align with that, you just have to force it into the category in order for you to say the lines at it. And it just doesn't go anywhere, and you don't get any good content.
Yeah.
Ultimately. Which is the only thing I care about.
What made me shut the whole thing off was when they insinuated that the reason I wasn't understanding the difference between different kinds of feminism was because I'm autistic and I'm showing black and white thinking, and I'm just lumping all feminists in together, and I'm like explicitly like, no, it's the same. It's just the same shit.
What's your core contention then, or like a few of your contentions about feminism, broadly speaking?
Patriarchy isn't real. Men and women are inherently unequal, so vying for equality in any sense kind of doesn't make sense. And not to say that like there is some sort of hierarchy I subscribe to. It's just that because we're different, we're inherently unequal. And overall, like I just see it as, and this is where the anti-leftist Marxist stuff comes in, is it is a core faction within the left. They are progressives, so they believe in progress at any, at any cost. They will always vote Democrat, pretty much. That, like, the Roe v. Wade thing kind of like proved that. My core contention with it isn't that the ideology itself is stupid, because there are a lot of stupid ideologies out there. My contention with it is that like they have taken over the detrans thing because they don't want conservatives to have it, and I would rather conservatives had it.
Okay, that's a interesting claim. What would be better about conservative management of the detrans phenomenon?
The better part of it, really just, can you still hear me? Okay, sorry, yeah. I thought I pulled it out. The better, like, what would make the conservative management of it, like, okay, the way that it's shaking out, a lot of feminists are sort of joining the conservative faction just because Republicans are desperate to win because the Democrats keep doing what they do. But like, I would prefer a harder right turn on this stuff, because pretty much everything that the left has done for pretty much forever, but if we're talking American politics, like for the last 60 years, since the 60s, like all of it has led to now, basically. Like there's been a continuous like jump 30 years into the future, then a Republican wins and we're 10 years back. But it's not like there's
So you're
no
talking a
real-
sexual revolution? I mean, let's draw like a specific line in the sand. Sexual revolution is led somehow through one way or another to now.
Yeah.
To sexual politics now, popular sexual politics, including transgenderism.
In a lot of ways. But the other reason I would prefer conservatives is just because they like have they I don't know how to phrase it. They try to stop the progress at a certain point. They try to slow it down at least. And the problem with the progress is where we're going now is get in the pot, eat the bugs. And if you slow that down even just a little bit, like it's better than if we just like jump off the cliff and into that. I think it's coming anyway. I don't think that it will stop. I think Republicans are going to be fine with it happening if it means that they win elections again. But like I would rather not continue towards total liberation, towards total equality. I don't see those. I just see them as empty values that allow for this kind of like very high level top down political maneuvering.
So to attempt to distill that, what you see manifesting in feminism is basically a form of leftism, which is about equality through central control.
Yeah.
And you have a problem with that?
I have a problem with that. It's like I'm going to sound like a crazy communist if I use the real language that I would use.
No, I want to hear a communist take down leftism.
The left is the left wing. The leftists are the left wing of capital. The right are the right wing of capital. The left are the vanguard of the bourgeoisie. They are the revolutionaries of the bourgeois. They are carryovers from when the bourgeoisie were actually revolutionary during the feudal period when feudalism was collapsing. The conservatives are the rear guard. They restabilize everything that the leftists destroy. And they do it in service of capital. I don't like that capital is in control of things. Because like this system requires that constant creative destruction, so to speak. You need, in order to generate economic growth indefinitely, you need to constantly level everything to the ground and then rebuild it. Because that's the only way that you continue to extract profit off of workers. I'm not a political communist. I don't do activism. I don't do anything about this. It's just critique. The reason it's just critique is because I'm a petite bourgeois manager, so my interests technically should align with the left. But because of everything that I've been through and how I've seen this play out and how ridiculous it all seems to me, I want absolutely nothing to do with it. I would rather, like, the only reason I would align with a conservative cause at all is because it, at the very least, doesn't try to smash everything all at once.
There's a lot there. I want to hear Helena's thoughts on this.
I don't know about all the economic stuff, but the way I see it is that the progressive, or I guess my contention with feminism, we'll say, is that at this point, I think it has completely diverged from reality. And I think that began not only with the sexual revolution, but with the conceptualization of this dichotomy between there's biology and social construction. And these two things are separate. And I think that that's a really big problem. And that is undergirding or underpinning everything that we've seen up until this point. And that's where I think, like, that's what I see Limpida's talking about when he says radical feminism has played a role in the development of gender ideology, because it invented this concept that there's biology and there's social construction, and the social construction is bad and we just need to throw it all away. And I think that when people are raised with those ideas, first of all, I think that's completely wrong. I think that the way I think about it is kind of like you can see gender like language. Okay, so different cultures on the surfaces, their languages sound different. Like the word for water bottle in English is not the same word as the word for water bottle in Mandarin. They sound very different, but all of these languages have the same kind of like structure under them that does come from, actual biological, neurological underpinnings in our brain that have evolved over years to give us the capability to form complex social societies. And gender does a very similar thing. And so I think that when you have a society that has fully swallowed this idea that there's biology and then there's social construction, they have nothing to do with each other, and the social construction is bad and it needs to be thrown away, that leaves people disconnected with themselves, unable to understand themselves, confused, lost, untethered. And that is what leads to the gender ideology. Gender ideology to me is not so much a patriarchal backlash against feminism, but it's people who have accepted the core tenets of feminism, trying to make sense of themselves in a way that is kind of like taken these ideas of feminism and like, yes, gone completely off left field. And now they're butting heads with each other. But at the end of the day, I really see it as people trying to make sense of where they belong in the society, in a society where these things we call gender, like they are very real. It's not something we can just demonize and toss away. So it is important to people, but it's been made verboten to actually have like just a realistic and honest look at it. And you see that, when it comes to like what you say, Benjamin, you say you're a gender positivist, and you can give like a very eloquent, thoughtful explanation for why you think that. But there are so many people, and it's not just the small, radical feminists on Twitter. I would say that many people in our society would immediately kind of be like triggered that what you're saying is like, oh, you think gender stereotypes are good. Like gender stereotypes are what leads women to be barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen. That's bad. Yeah. And so like, I think people have really lost the capability to actually reckon with our reality, the reality of our bodies, the realities of being a complex social species. Mm-hmm. And I think what's behind that is these core ideas of feminism. And that's my beef with it.
Limpida, I want to go back to what you were saying when you responded to my gender positivity rant, was about just accepting who you are as who you are and going through the process of just radical acceptance of who you are. And I think radical acceptance has some sort of weird culty thing going on. I just mean to like just really deeply accept yourself, and you don't need the idea of the masculine. You don't need these images. And in fact, these images are not as important as people actually acting that out in your direct experience and in your life. My back to that is that once we want to create art or culture or to communicate across time, we need to package things inside of images, inside of stories. And then we also attending to those stories. And let's just say gender is a story that allows for society to manage the relationship between the sexes over time to deal with the consequences of that, which is more human beings, and then perpetuate that. And not only is gender a story, but you also need to understand how to read the story and how to interpret the story. And a lot of what I see wrong in a lot of activism, and just because we're going to pick on feminism, but I don't mean to pick on feminism, is just a bad reading, or like an inability to read and to interpret what a gender role would be and how it could be good in and of itself or bad in and of itself, or how could it could be interpreted lazily or poorly or wisely. And so I think that gender's still operating, but you're just, because you got swept up into these bad ideas, that you don't need it right now. You don't need to communicate that. You just need to be honest with yourself and develop and allow those things to happen. But I would probably say that in 20 years, if you want to communicate like your journey, you'll probably have some sort of rough idea of a man that you'll be working with, just to communicate it, if you ever end up going to literature. Because I just think that's how we express ourselves, and we're not good readers anymore. And the social construction thing that you're saying about, Helen, is just, we're just going to throw the book away and start over again. We're just going to throw the book away and start over again. And you don't understand what you're throwing away when you're throwing away the book, because you're throwing away your ability to have a connection to the past, but also to read the past and to read the social dynamics. And so, like, I keep on saying this, if we destroy gender tonight, it'll be reinvented by tomorrow at noon. It's just, we're going to have to reinvent it, and we're going to lose a lot of the social cues, and these things are subjective and variable depending on the culture and stuff. But there's so much rich and necessary behavioral management in order for the males and the females, especially stranger males and females, to orchestrate positively together. And that would be basically the usefulness of gender as a concept.
You're already seeing it. I mean, like, the relationship between men and women, especially in like the Zoomers, is completely discombobulated.
Oh, really?
And you will see this if you ever dare to have a hot take on Twitter about dating apps, because everybody who has been scorned like comes out of the woodworks and just like is throwing all this stuff. And it's just so clear how like people, like, I just don't think it's normal, the degree to which people misunderstand each other and are, you know, just assuming a defensive but also offensive position with the opposite sex. And,
are you subtweeting that? Was it Melissa Chen or no? It was Sarah Hayter's comment that she posted yesterday about men don't realize how they treat attractive women much better than unattractive women. And then a bunch of men are like, well, women don't understand that they treat men with resources differently than.
Yeah, I'm not responding to that directly. It's actually, I have made the mistake. I've now set a rule for myself that I am not allowed to talk about dating apps on Twitter, because it's just always turns into such a shitstorm. But
I have to figure out what's going on there.
Well, I mean, the discourse that I always get involved in is because there's this graph of OkCupid, and it's like a study that they did or something where it's like men rate more women in like medium attractiveness than they do in the top levels of attractiveness or the lowest levels. I think it's something like the distribution for male ratings is more equal, whereas women either rate someone very, very attractive or like not attractive at all. And there's like, or no, I think it's actually the majority of men rated by women are unattractive on dating apps. Yeah, that's what it is. That's what it is. And like a lot of, you know, men kind of use this as evidence for like, oh, you'll never succeed with a woman. Just give up. Like, don't even try, because women, they only want to date the top 0.0001% of absolute chads.
Hypergamy, is that what it's called?
Yeah. Hypergamy? Yeah. And so I'm always saying like, the dating apps are just not a good reflection of like how women are in real life. And I understand that there's kind of like a difference between like what women say they want versus what they actually go for. I understand that. But I also, it's like, you come on, like you can't look at like, you can't go to like a mall and just observe the couples there and think that like every woman there is only with like the top like 1% of like shredded Chad billionaires. Like, no, like there's plenty of just normal couples. But it's like, yeah, it's just a mess, and people get really heated. And I understand why people are really heated. People are really hurt. And it's like trying to explain to like a early 20s person that like the dating apps are bad for you. It's just, it doesn't like.
Dating apps literally, I mean, they make money off the misery.
Exactly.
They want you to be on it as long as possible.
They don't want you to actually find a relationship.
Yeah, so they will intentionally put you with people that you like demographically are not compatible with.
Yeah, and it warps your brain if you're a man or if you're a woman. Like the whole thing is just like antithetical to like how people experience attraction. It's just a hot mess. But I think that is like in a microcosm of like how messed up the relationships between men and women are right now.
And not to mention anything about the abortion debate or contraception or the sexual revolution. There's so much that is not being represented and taken into account by the younger people. We've really betrayed your generation by liberating ourselves so much that we didn't pass on any kind of like, you might want to be careful about that, or there's these things you might want to not just engage with. Sex with strangers every weekend. It's not really liberatory, and it's damaging to the souls of men and women alike. But
I think like I don't want it to be like boomer bashing is something that's like fun sometimes, but it's not. I don't think it's an adequate critique, because, and this is to bring in the whole Marxist framework again, is like those massive social changes that happened after the 60s that are still going on right now, the like huge disruption that we're seeing between the generations, like those things have to happen in order for the groundwork for the next economic stage to be laid. And they also happen in reaction to changes in the economic foundation. It's downstream, it's economic, then it's political, then it's social.
Are you supposing like the Great Reset or like a completely new post-capitalist system that's actually
No, it's all capitalism. It's all capitalism. But I'm not saying specifically the Great Reset either, but that's part of it too. Like that's why some of this stuff, the transhumanism, the like abolishing the family and things like that stuff is necessary in order to make people more amenable to massive changes in their way of life, like to dissolve social bonds as much as possible so that you are a pure individual who will take whatever is coming your way. And that has been the role of the left historically, whereas the right comes up in the back and says, okay, these are the new social bonds that we need for this generation in order to keep the system as it currently functions going. And then it just happens cyclically. It just keeps push and pull, push and pull.
Yeah, I'm getting into conservatism, and there's some interesting thoughts about it. I'm really new to it, but I'm already kind of wary. I'm like, you're not solving our problems. You're not offering a solution. You're just slowing everything down. Like you can't stop the progress. Or can you? So, and then when you bring up conservatism as an answer, then you do have to contend with people misinterpreting gender roles and compulsory forcing of gender roles is not what I'm advocating for. That's bad reading. But that's the thing that you run in with the right. The right will tend toward the really hard reactionary movement, which would be a restriction of freedom. But to what extent society needs that is an open question. You know, if we're messing up so bad now in liberation,
here's the thing. Like, I think the concept of liberation, as we understand it from the 2020 United States post-60s thing, like, I think it's a misnomer to call it liberation because it's not. Maybe it's not a misnomer, but I think it's just useless because, like, once you liberate yourself from something, you create new obligations. So when you're liberated from the family, what do you have to do now? Like, you still have to like exist in the world. You still have social ties. You still have economic ties. You still got to do stuff. You're not actually liberated. You're just like taking yourself out of one place and put yourself in a different one. I don't think like. And that's also forceful. That's violent. That happens violently. That happens through political force. That happens sometimes through physical force. The right's not excuse, but justification for enforcing gender roles and enforcing like social roles and hierarchies is that not having a solid concept of where you are in the world because you're constantly being pulled here and there. The conservative impulse is to try to keep things stable. And sometimes that stability requires restriction of liberty, quote unquote, restriction of some level of individualism, so that you, not necessarily restriction of individualism, but restriction on like what you take for granted as liberty, right? But even within those like more restrictive systems, you still have freedoms. You still get to do things as a human being that you're free to do. So I don't like, that's one reason why I don't like the whole like total liberation or liberation mindset of like, okay, well, we've been liberated. Why do we have to go back or whatever? Like, first of all, there is no going back. That's not possible. And secondly, like, you still have these obligations, but who are your obligations to? And why are you carrying them out in the first place? And is it really liberation if someone else is doing it for you? So that's my general critique of that.
I'm sorry, we need to wrap up. I felt like this is like 1/10 of the conversation that we were having. Let's
do like a cheeky live stream sometime soon. Just get Josh back on here and continue railing against the feminists.
Well, plug your works so people can find your works. Limpida, you got your Substack going on with your crazy,
yes, I do.
Crazy thoughts.
It's called Sinente Moini Strigoilor, which means holding hands with ghosts. The link is strigoi.substack.com. And
do you speak Romanian? Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, I do.
Cool.
And my Twitter is @AmericanDog1998 because the old one got nuked.
I also have a Substack. Mine is just my Twitter @.substack.com.
And that will be in the description because that'll be in the description.
Yeah.
Well, say goodbye to the audience.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening.